everything.
Welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, a program that promotes the belief that the church could turn the world towards peace if the church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. I want to welcome you back, and before I begin and introduce my guest, I want to say a very special thank you to all the viewers and supporters of Every Church a Peace Church TV. This program that started back in 2003 has secured its 3 consecutive Allen Awards, and the latest being the Viewer's Choice Award, which we received for this year. I want to thank you so much for the privilege to be able to be before you and to present guests as we talk about faith and peace and love here in the world. In the beginning, we are told in the book of Genesis, the revelations that came from Genesis, that God created man and woman, the heavens and the earth, and then he looked back on it and called it good and very good. A lot has happened since God's creations in the Garden of Eden. So many ups and downs to our human self, our human examples of God's image. The habits of war, man's habits of greed, man's habits of violence, the habit of finding other human beings different, sufficiently enough that we would go and kill and destroy and oppress and murder those others. Differences that are based on race, gender, religion, geography, tribe, all these differences, so-called, that cause our tribe to try to conquer another tribe. Humans have developed some pretty bad habits since the days of the Garden of Eden, and where we now have tens of thousands of nuclear weapons at the ready, available to destroy the last vestiges of God's image, us. We live in a world of disease where over 30,000 children under 5 die each day from disease, and while we spend millions and millions of dollars every day to support war and destruction. My guest today has studied our bad habits that has led God's creation down a path over the years of oppression and violence and war and greed. He shares with us his ideas of how we can overcome these bad habits, to open up for us a vision where we can live in a shared common humanity, where we can achieve peace through that common humanity, where the loyalty is not to family, it's not to nation, it's not to religion, but a loyalty only to each other as human beings in one common family, a loyalty that inspires love and compassion. That's what my guest is about. That's what my guest has written about in a book that's called Beyond Systems, Achieving Peace Through Shared Humanity. Dr. Frank Ostrowski,
how do you do?
Thank you for being here at Every Church a Peace Church.
Thank you.
May I call you Frank?
Yes, indeed.
Let me share a little about Frank's background with you. Frank grew up in a strict Catholic family in Minnesota. He attended Catholic schools most of his life, entered seminary, studied to become a priest, became a priest, a Catholic priest, a parish Catholic priest, studied in Rome, fell in love, became disillusioned with the priesthood and perhaps disillusioned with organized religions to a degree. Is that a fair statement, Frank?
That's a fair statement, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Became interested and turned his life towards psychology, where he obtained his PhD in psychology at the University of Florida, and developed not only a clinical practice in psychology, but expanded it into the psychology of peace and peacemaking. Frank is the representative to the United Nations for the International Fellowship of Reconciliation. He is a husband of 39 years, a father, and a grandfather.
Right.
And again, I welcome you, Frank. I've read this book. It's an amazing book. You open yourself up wonderfully with these beautiful examples of your life's path and how it led you through this experience of being a priest and now this experience of being a humanitarian and a psychologist. It's just, it was a very wonderful, wonderful read, very easy read, and touched my heart deeply.
Thank you.
We're going to talk more about this book, and I guess we can get to the heart of it. I call these bad habits that we've developed over the years since we were seen in the Garden of Eden, perhaps metaphorically. But we did have a beginning as a human community, and that line has led us through a lot of difficult paths that one could easily say do not reflect God's image. Tell us about what you mean by beyond systems, achieving peace through shared humanity. What are the systems that you talk about?
Well, the systems basically that I'm speaking of here, let me step back just a second and say that we're all born innocent, as far as I can see. The whole idea of original sin that has been propagated by the church and so on, to me is, I don't understand it even. We're born into a system that is, first of all, it comes to us from family, then it comes from the school, it comes from the church, it comes from the state, and it is a total system that we are not even aware of. In other words, we take it into our system, that system that's out there, and in so doing, we learn that we belong to a certain tribe, a certain group, a certain ethnicity, a certain religion, a certain whatever it is, and that religion somehow or other, or that ethnicity, or that whatever it is somehow different from, but also in some ways better than the other one, whatever the other one is. And that sets the stage for a lot of conflict. And that's what I see as you call it, the bad habits. But I call it the system, the various systems that we are born into, because I think, as I say, we take it into our own system. It becomes a part of us. It becomes so much a part of us, we don't even see it after a while. This is the way the world is. We take it to be absolute truth. And of course, it's not.
Yeah. Well, you begin in examining these systems, the system of family. Tell us about how the system of family had molded you to go into one way rather than another.
Well, I grew up in a family that was a very loving family. It was my parents were both college graduates, which was an unusual thing back in the 30s. And my mother ran a restaurant, which is also very unusual that a woman would, have that kind of a job. And my dad eventually worked in the restaurant with her. We grew up, it was a family in which Catholicism and Irish Catholicism, because although my name is Polish, I actually grew up on the Irish side of the family, that the Irish Catholicism was the best way to do things, and Protestants, after all, there's something wrong with them somehow. We wouldn't associate with them very much. And blacks, after all, they were, there weren't an awful lot of them in Minnesota, but we were living on the edge of a black community where our house was, and they were sort of people that, they were shiftless and didn't really, weren't too great. And Jews are the same way. I mean, we even though this was a very loving family, there were a lot of things that I absorbed from that family that I had to really think about later on. And I think that's what's important, is that we all grow up with whatever prejudices come with it. And we have to learn somehow to get beyond these. And this is what I talk about, as living beyond systems.
Moving beyond the training that your parents gave you that was in conflict with what God would want you to be or to do.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a very difficult struggle for people, particularly when it deals with not only family, but some of the other systems like the state. How does the state as a system train us to go in ways that God would not want us to go?
Well, the state, of course, has this huge power to train us. It can tell us that we not only that we have to pay taxes, but also that we have to have this supreme loyalty to the state. If we don't, we are looked at as treasonous. And the state then trains us in the one training that to me is beyond everything is militarism. In other words, that we send our young men and young women now to into the military service. Gwynne Dyer, many years ago, I don't know if you know that name or not, but Gwynne Dyer was a man that had a TV program, and what he did is take young men that had come right out of high school, and they ended up in, I think it was in Paris Island, the military base, the Marine base. And they show up kind of sleepy one morning, and the title of his show was Anyone's Son Will Do. And what he did is show how these young men who just basically were sort of ordinary young kids, inside of a few weeks, inside of a few months, became trained killers. And this is what the state can do. It has this power somehow to train us in militarism and to exact taxes and all the rest of it. And I'm not saying in any way that I want to be an anarchist and do away with the state, but I am saying that we have to rethink everything that we do, everything that the state does, everything that any religion does. That what is important finally is, if we are going to live, as I say, beyond systems, it means that we choose. And we choose any time something is separating us from the rest of humanity. What the state does, of course, is tell us that there's this enemy out there. We have to fear him. We have to kill him. We have to do all kinds of things to him. And somehow or other, that has got to be rethought somehow.
Well, how would you rethink that in a environment where, as you say, it's almost common knowledge that it's somewhere out there that we have enemies that are after us. Of course, the common slang or colloquialism now is that if you don't fight them over there, they'll have to fight them in our neighborhoods, which seems to me kind of strange. But I guess that's part of the fear, the mechanism of fear that allows for the support of these types of systems that can train children to grow up to be killers and rapists. This more recent example that's being talked about now in that small town just outside of Baghdad, where this 14-year-old girl was raped, planning to rape her, separate her family from her. While she was raped, they killed her 5-year-old sister and her parents, raped her, and then burned the family. And the perpetrators of that, of course, were some of our soldiers, and during the trials of them, he just said that this whole Iraq experience made him angry. Now, one could not visualize this boy developing into that type of monster, but for the training to kill without mercy, which is part of the whole military scheme, that system that's in place to take innocence and rub that innocence out so that they can kill in a military setting. How do you respond to those that say that we have to have the military, we have to have killers because we have enemies?
Yeah, You know, all I can say is that this, to begin with, is certainly not the message of Jesus, is it, huh?
No, it's not God's image. Right.
Every church, a peace church, to me, that is a total no-brainer. That this is the way that we are supposed to be living with each other. But more than that, even if you are not a Christian, what I'm saying is that our common humanity, the very fact that we are human beings, that we have a membership in this human race, says that we are not meant to kill each other. We are not. That's not what our task in life is supposed to be. Do we have enemies out there? Yeah, people. We can create enemies too. We can always look at people as the enemy, or we can look at people always as those who are misguided, and that we need somehow to find them in a different way. We need to understand something about them. I think one of the great things was, and one of the things I quote in my book is Thich Nhat Hanh, who was the famous Vietnamese pacifist. And he was asked, what would we do, 9/11, what would you do? I mean, after all these guys attacked us, shouldn't we attack back? And his response was, no, what you do is first find out what they want. And you do it with a lot of care and how do I want to say caution, in the sense you take people with you that you knew could support you, because this would be very difficult. You're talking about people who've just killed, and the immediate reaction to most of us when somebody has just killed us or attacked us in some way is to get revenge. That revenge has to stop somewhere. And what Thich Nhat Hanh is basically saying is that we stop it by, first of all, listening to what the other side says, really hearing them, compassionate listening. And it doesn't mean that we don't try to solve the thing, but we don't solve it by force of arms. We solve it in a different way.
Yeah, one thing that is fairly plain over the years is that violence begets violence. Violence stirs up more violence. And when you can counter violence with love, it just sets a different energy there. It may result in not being successful, but we do know that violence is successful in creating more violence.
Exactly.
And if we look at the Jesus model here in terms of the violence that was done to him, and if Jesus is a reflection of how Jesus wants the human community to act and react, then when violence was done to him, he was able to meet it with compassion and forgiveness, and that yielded him to eternal life. Now, that's the Christian story, and I think the same story can be in a, whether or not it's in the Christian context or any religious context, that if you meet violence with a certain love, a true love, one that has to be cultivated, because you are separated from this culture of violence, and so you have to be trained to have this love. But if you have it and you're confronted with violence, it can melt away the violence, because it can melt away the fear that's in your enemy about you. So that's the dynamic that many pacifists see as the response to violence is through a recognition that there is a common humanity and a common love that we are asked and trained and equipped to have with our fellow human being. And you say it's so very real in terms of your book.
Can I say just one thing on that too? You know, I think what this demands, if we're not going to seek revenge, it demands what's called forgiveness. And forgiveness is a terribly misunderstood term, I think, because some people think of it as it's just a cheap way out for the guy that's offended us. But I look at forgiveness in some ways as a very selfish act, because what's happening inside of me as I carry all this hatred is just a huge amount of corrosion It's just eating me alive. It's just doing terrible things to me. Now, some could say, well, the only way to take care of that is then to go ahead and fight back and kill the other guy. And I say that that really solves nothing, because it just continues the struggle. But if I can just say I refuse to hold this ill will, to hold this revenge cycle in me anymore, then what I'm able to do somehow is get rid of the poison inside of me. And in so doing, as I say, it's a selfish act in a way, but it really will stop the cycle.
Well, I'm reminded about this terrible example in nickel mines, Pennsylvania, with the Amish. And that element of forgiveness there, after the horrendous execution of those young girls in their schoolhouse, those Amish girls in that schoolhouse, that's almost immediately the Amish community, rose up in a collective sense of forgiveness, which amazed many of us in how they could forgive this murderer and forgive his family, and how the Amish community gathered around this man's family to comfort his family at this time. And what a wonderful example that is in terms of being able to shed away that corrosive force of revenge and hatred that obviously works against your systems, your bodily systems, and makes you a healthier person, mind and body, and of course soul. How can we, Frank, utilize or change some of these systems? They seem so entrenched. That we honor so much of the not only war, but we honor the warriors. We honor power and money. Wealth seems to have such a high standing, particularly in this country. And we ignore those who are hungering and thirsting and are naked. How can we change this pattern, these habits, this system, so that we can develop to a higher level of consciousness towards God's image, the way that we were at the beginning?
The discourse would take 3 or 4 days to talk about this one. But let me just
we only have about 10 or 15 minutes.
Let me just talk about a
highlights.
Couple of things that I can think of. One of them, first of all, is our addiction to militarism in this country. That we're addicted to it because not just because sometimes we say, well, the power brokers, the ones who run all the huge corporations, that they're making millions and millions and billions, and they are not going to give up their power. And that's true. I think that's true. But it's also the little guy in the street that is worried about his job. In other words, when a new weapon system is created, for instance, I don't know how much is known about this, but when a new weapon system is created, or a new fighter plane is developed and so on in the Congress, it's passed in the Congress, what happens? The first thing that they do is try to make sure that this goes out to as many different congressional districts as possible, so that everybody's going to have a job, and they're not going to be able to get rid of this weapon system because everybody's job is going to be involved in this. I mean, everybody, that is to say everybody that's going to be hired by this. So, in other words, there's a worry that how can you say that if we do away with some of this militarism, that we're going to have any jobs left? And in my book, I quote a few things. One is a study by the American Society of Civil Engineers that did a study. They've done it every 5 years, I think, and the most recent one said that right now the infrastructure in this country, to restore the infrastructure in this country would take $1.6 trillion. Now that's a lot of money. And just to do that, who's going to do it? Well, if we stop funding the military,
we can build roads.
We can build roads, bridges, and you know, all
they
this
have to be built too.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's certainly one clear way where we can redirect if we had the political will, and hopefully we'll get there if people come to the consciousness that that we don't need to have these billion-dollar airplanes and these billion-dollar systems and space. We don't have to have weapons in space, but what we do have to have is an Earth and a planet that's able to feed people and to clothe people and to share in the differences and in the cultures of people. That's where we have to go if we are to be returned back to Eden. And return back to God's image as a way of utilizing resources to protect and preserve and enhance life, not to build systems that destroy it. Your book, where can you get this book, Frank?
Right now it's only available online. You can get it through Amazon.com. That would be the easiest way to get it, I suppose.
All right.
And just ask for Beyond Systems and my name if you can remember it. Or you can get it through BarnesandNoble.com.
Well, it's an excellent book. It's 163 pages, and it ends with this quote. I wanted to be able to read this quote because it's a very powerful quote. I hadn't heard it before. It's from Pierre Teilhard De Chardin. And it goes, "Someday, after we have mastered the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness the energies of love. Then, for the second time in history of the world, man will have discovered fire." Once we harness the energies of love, then for the second time we will discover fire. That's a powerful conclusion to what you're saying is what we have to do. Frank, I want to thank you so much for being with us. You need to come back because we just kind of hit the very tops of what you had to say.
Good.
I do invite everybody to go read this book, Beyond Systems, Achieving Peace Through Our Shared Humanity. I want to thank you all for being here. Frank and I want you to seek peace, find peace, and be peace.
Turn our back on us. How